that you don't think there's enough blacks out there who are qualified to fill the number of vacancies allotted for them in those schools. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the word qualified really is misleading.
I got it. So
You're saying that we're not good enough to go to these schools?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
We'll be quiet, please, so the witness can be heard. He deserves to be heard.
I never knew a young Joe
My support
Biden was
for the
like
nomination of Judge
heavy
Robert
in
Bork
politics.
This may be the most important Supreme Court nomination of our time, not simply because the present court is so closely divided, or even because Judge Bork is the most highly qualified nominee of this generation, but because this is an historic crossroads as regards the expanding power of judges, which is to say, the erosion of people's rights to govern themselves democratically.
Thomas Sowell is pretty smart, man. As I start learning more about him, he's truly a student of politics. That is crazy.
Gradually but steadily over the past 35 years, more and more decisions have been taken out of the hands of the American people and vested in courts. Those preoccupied with the merits or demerits of the specific issues raised in the cases involved pay little attention to the general drift away from accountable representative government. The ad hoc way many of these landmark cases of this era were based on legal principles improvised for the moment has meant that law itself has become more and more a matter of how judges happen to feel politically or socially about particular issues or particular litigants. No one has opposed these judicial trends more consistently or more ably than Robert H. Bork, first as a scholar and then as a judge. Mr. Bork has rejected
Who is
the
Mr.
idea
Bork?
that judges should engage in heroic adventures in policymaking, as he
What is
calls
he
it.
referring to?
The renunciation of power, he has said, is the morality of the jurist, not the assumption of power in the name of morality. What Mr. Bork has fought against consistently over the years has been, in his words, government by judges who are not applying the Constitution. The statistics thrown around recklessly as to how Judge Bork has allegedly voted against women X% of the time or for some other class of litigants Y% of the time are no more reliable than the definitions used by the special interest sources from which they come. Arbitrary definitions are no less arbitrary when they are expressed in numbers rather than words. Taking these box scores seriously reflects either a dangerously naive gullibility about statistics or an even more dangerously cynical view of the truth. The same kind of box score approach has been used against Judge Bork in the racial area, except that all the things Mr. Bork has done to advance the civil rights of blacks and Asians are either ignored or played down, while every legal question he has raised about any portion of any civil rights law or court decision has been automatically defined by his critics as being anti-civil rights or anti-black. Obviously, I wouldn't be here if I believed any of that.
So I'm assuming he's saying a judge that they're in the room discussing has anti-black beliefs. I don't really understand the context, but he's saying that, well, if they had anti-black beliefs, I wouldn't be in the room right now. But where's Joe Biden? Where is he? I want to see what he has to say.
Civil rights need to be understood not simply as a special benefit to minorities, but as something essential to everyone. Civil rights define a civilized and humane society. State-imposed discrimination was central to the racial oppression of blacks during the Jim Crow era in the South. Judge Bork opposed this central focus of racial discrimination, from Brown v. Board in the 1950s to Washington v. Davis in the 1970s to his work on the Court of Appeals in the 1980s. His criticisms of particular parts of particular laws and court decisions have often been in terms of the extension of constitutional rules from the government to private individuals and non-governmental organizations. These serious legal questions are by no means confined to Judge Bork. The law journals and law books have been full of controversies for decades over so-called state action. It was precisely this principle which many raised in the restrictive covenant cases, which are not simply cases about whether you are for or against housing discrimination. Demagoguery on this point is especially uncalled for, since no one, as far as I've been able to tell, has ever seriously advanced any evidence that Shelley v. Kramer or Reitman versus Mulkey made any discernible difference in racial housing patterns. The question is whether political symbolism was enough reason to justify trying to make the Constitution say something that it did not say. In our preoccupation with specific issues and specific groups, it is easy to forget that all groups stand to lose as Americans when the law is undermined as judicial activism surrounds all laws with a large and growing penumbra of uncertainty.
I really like that he said that there. He said all Americans will stand to lose if the law is undermined, which is 100% true no matter how you look at any type of situation. If the laws are not being taken seriously, or us as citizens start looking at our laws and be like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, or this law sucks. I mean, of course you are given a right as a citizen to protest. However, when we start looking at laws and being like, you know what, let's collectively ignore this, that's when the nation starts to fail.
Surrounds all laws with a large and growing penumbra of uncertainty. Yeah.
You want to summarize your...
I think I have 10 minutes, was it? I have about a minute, another minute.
Fine.
No one loses more than the black community when their children are not educated, or when judicial undermining of law enforcement makes their streets far more unsafe than they were 40 years ago. Legal principles are not just abstract intellectual matters. They are often far more important to far more people than the specific issues which provoke single-issue organizations to venom and propaganda. If more people will look beyond this propaganda to the enduring principles which should guide the law of the nation, I am sure that more will support the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court. I don't think that judicial activism has been beneficial to minorities. One of the reasons is what I've mentioned earlier, that it's extremely hard for kids in many ghettos to get a decent education today. Let's say as decent an education as I got in the center of Harlem 40 years ago, because the disruption is so much greater today and there's so little you can do about it. If you expel more black males from some schools than you expel Asian females, that becomes a court case. You have the American Civil Liberties Union intervening in these places. There were students, there were parents actually, parading, I believe in Chicago, with signs saying American Civil Liberties Union, keep out, because they wanted their kids to get educated. That couldn't be done if you're going to have to due process every disruptive student. I think one of the great handicaps that blacks and other minorities face across the country is that they are systematically mismatched with universities in the admissions process. That is, if Harvard feels that it must have X% of blacks, and if the...
I definitely understand why he's saying that. It kind of gets a little problematic when universities start saying, yeah, we need to have this percentage of this minority. I'm not even going to say African American. I'm just going to say a specific minority, rather than picking the students that are most compatible with your university. Forget academics and compatibility, since if a student is just not compatible with the university, or of course academics tie into that, then of course it's not going to be a good fit. It's not really fair to just send students to a school just because you need a percentage. Because not only are you're just doing the student a disservice. You're not doing the school a disservice, because, I mean, the school's going to make their money regardless. But you're doing not only the student that you're accepting into the school a disservice, you're doing the student that you got that is not going to that school a disservice, because they would probably be an extremely good fit for that university. But the one you accepted, you're kind of just looking at them as a statistic, and you may not look at it that way, but that's what it is. Of course, there are circumstances where that's not true. Like, a student gets accepted to a school and they do great at the university, whether they deserve to go or not. But I think all in all, for the majority, if you as a university or a corporation are saying, well, we need this percentage of minority or whatever to work here. Let's just accept them. It's just, it can be extremely problematic, in my opinion.
The pool is such that they can't get X% of blacks at the same level as the rest of the Harvard students. They're going to take those blacks who would have succeeded in some state university and bring them to Harvard, where many of them will fail. Or MIT is a better example, that the average black student at MIT is in the bottom 10% of MIT students in math. But he is in the top 90% of all American students in math, because MIT students are so phenomenal in mathematics. Something like 1/4 of all the black students going to MIT do not graduate. You're talking about a pool of people who score at the 90th percentile in math, whom you are artificially turning into failures by mismatching them with the school.
And that's, I think, the misconception a lot of people have with this, is that when they hear stuff like this, they're thinking like, oh, you're saying that we're not good enough to go to these schools? No, that's not what anyone's saying. But it is true that some schools just aren't the best match. Like he just said, he was referring to African Americans going to MIT and being at the bottom 10% of students there. However, he did combat that and say, even if you get into MIT, you are a top 90 percentile in math in the entire country. So not saying that you're not worthy of going there. However, just accepting students in there or looking like specifically at race for accepting students you are basically saying like you don't care if the students fail because you're trying to meet your quota and you're doing your community a disservice. Whereas if you were to go to a different university and you're in the top 90% of math in the country, you probably one of the highest ranked students at that university, and you'll probably be more successful when you graduate just because you went somewhere that was more compatible for you. That's all he's saying, and that can be debate for a really high issue in America.
The problem is not whether you believe that school desegregation should have ended. I believe it should have ended long before. George Bork believes it should have ended long before. What he and what I have objected to are the principles used in that decision, because those principles take on a life of their own, and they come back to haunt you in other areas. Obviously, this old phrase, the hard cases make bad law, derived from that fact. You dream up a principle to reach this result, and then the principle has a life of its own.
So the principle of desegregating the
No,
schools.
that wasn't the principle. The principle was the reason that they picked for it was.
Well, that's all I'm saying. Okay, the reasons they picked,
Yes.
desegregating the schools, you and Judge Bork agree were the wrong principles, and they should have not. So the court shouldn't have done that.
No, the court should have done it.
Oh, okay.
Both of us have said the court should have done it.
I see.
And in my case, and I think in his case, the court should have done it a lot sooner.
How?
They should have ruled that it wasn't equal protection of the law, because nobody in his right mind believes that there was equal protection of the law in the Jim Crow era of these school systems.
I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying.
Then this is what bothers me. People are talking about how judges should be sensitive to this particular group or that particular group. And if that means anything, if it means he's applying the law differently, that's precisely how blacks were held down for generations in the South.
I see. So
by
literacy
applying the law differently.
So literacy test, as long as...
So he's saying it's the same, it's different sides of the same coin, which whether you want to agree or not, it kind of is, because if you're using the law to hold people down, it's kind of the different side of using the same law to hold other people up. So I understand where he's coming from in that sense.
as they were equally applied are all right.
Sure.
So I thought you thought. I gather from your comments about MIT and Harvard that you don't think there's enough blacks out there who are qualified to fill the number of vacancies allotted for them in those schools. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the word qualifies really is misleading.
I got it. So, but my point is, you believe there are not enough black women and men out there that are the same as white women and men to be able to go through Harvard and MIT.
Yes,
What you're
it's
saying.
not a question of what I think, it's a factual matter.
So factually, you're saying factually there are not enough.
Factually, this study's already been done by Clipgard at Harvard, and he's...
So, okay. It seems like President Biden, well, he wasn't the president in this clip. He's being intentionally, I don't want to say ignorant, but he's taking his words out of context. It's not, for one, the number of African Americans in America compared to non-African Americans is extremely high. Like, it's only 13 million African Americans, or maybe 14 or 15 today, in the country. So back then, I can imagine it was probably less in comparison. So let's say you're MIT and how many students does MIT have? I'm about to just do the math. MIT student count. So MIT has around 4,000 or 5,000 students, it seems. I don't know. Yeah, it seems about like. No, it has around 12,000 students. So let's say you have 12,000 students and you have to accept 10% African Americans or 20%. I'll say 20% African Americans. So that's 2,200 students if you have 11,000, somewhere around that. Let's say 10,000. You have to accept 2,000 African American students. It's 13 million in the country, but you're looking for 2,000 African American students in the top 10% of math in the country. And if you're MIT, you're probably already in the top 10%. That's probably the average. So top 5% would be a good statistic. So you're looking for 2,000 African American students who are at the top of 5% on math in the country. Even if you found 2,000 students who are the top 5%, what are the chances of them going there? Let's say 15% of them actually go to your university. I don't even know if it's 2,000 African American students. So that means 2,000 African American students. That means 15%. It's a lot of crappy math, bro. All I'm saying is it has to be around at least 5,000 to 10,000 African American students in the country, or in the world, or in the country, just for you to get 2,000 African American students who go to your university, who are the top 5% of math. So all I'm saying is the numbers aren't really on your side in having that many students who are African American, who are extremely great at math, who want to go to your university. Because if you need to accept 2,000 African American students and they have to be the top 5% of math, that means around 10,000 or 15,000 at least will have to apply to your university and actually pick your university to go there. All I'm trying to say is it probably isn't enough African American students who are that high in math and who actually want to go to your college in America, because there's not really that many in the country. So maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. I don't know. My math kind of sucked there, but if you have any suggestions, comment them down below. Peace.